All right, let's go for this one here, which is all the way to LA, which is where we went to meet the man who kind of bridged the gap between the old blues, fantastic Fleetwood Mac, and the more kind of billion-selling coffee table Fleetwood Mac. And he's the guy who did it all. It's kind of roughly correct, isn't it? Lindsey Buckingham is the man. Let's take a look. Lindsey Buckingham of Fleetwood Mac is the singer-guitarist who's generally credited with transforming a fading English blues band into global rock superstars. The Fleetwood Mac album Rumours, released in 1977, has to date sold almost 20 million copies in the US alone. It's officially the third highest-selling single-disc album in history. Besides his on-again, off-again, on-again relationship with Fleetwood Mac, Lindsey's solo career is currently healthier than ever. His fourth solo album, Under the Skin, his first since 1992, featured in the top 10 of most end of 2006 Best Albums of the Year polls. Lindsey, I met you with Mick Fleetwood around 2003, 2004, and you were complaining about the fact that you had this album you wanted to bring out, and you really just wanted to get it out. You never got it out. Finally, you have it out all these years later. Why does it take so long to get a solo album out? What happens? Does Fleetwood Mac come to you and say, he's got a bunch of songs now, he's got a bunch of songs, can we steal these?
Well, that's one way of looking at it. I tend to look at it a little less judgmentally than that. I mean, part of being in a band is being responsive to the needs of the band. And even though Fleetwood Mac is a sort of an entity that sort of comes together and goes apart and comes together at a fairly long, the intervals between are quite long. We are a band, and we are not having reunions when we get back together. We're just doing our next thing. Yeah. The last time I put a solo album out was 14 years ago. It's not for lack of intent during that time that there has been no solo album. One time in '97, I had been working with Mick for a while, and I put that aside because the band wanted to do a live album. 2 years later, after we got done touring, I picked it up and kept working on it and finished it, or got close to finishing on it. And then Fleetwood Mac wanted to do a studio album. So oddly enough, a lot of the material that would have gone to a solo album ended up being on the Say You Will album that Fleetwood Mac did a few years ago.
When you do solo on an album like this, does that mean that you're trying to escape from your reputation, or, if you like, in some ways maybe to honor that reputation?
Well, I think what it is that because Fleetwood Mac has become something in which politics play a great part, and that there's nothing wrong with that. I think that probably is the case in a lot of bands. Because after we did an album called Tusk, the band got together with me and said, well, Lindsey, we still want you to produce, but you can't do this and you can't do this anymore. That was the only reason I started making solo albums. Again, to address a side of what I found interesting that was no longer possible, generally speaking.
You brought up Tusk. Let's just talk about this for a second, which was like, in terms of musical experimentation, right in the middle of new wave and punk and all this, in terms of, say, the very end of the 70s, directly after one of the biggest selling, probably the biggest selling album of all time, you decide to bring this thing out, which is what you always wanted to do, to be, to push yourself, to be experimental, etc. They obviously said yes to this. You're the guy who put the whole thing together. And what was it? Oh, it only sold 5 million. It doesn't sell 25 million, therefore it's a failure. Can we have Rumours too, please? Is that the way it was?
In a nutshell, I mean, the band had a little bit of reservation about going that direction when we started, but, as the album, made its way to completion, everyone was completely drawn in. I can't say that Warner Brothers. I'm trying to imagine, them sitting in the board meeting, putting this thing on for the first time and kind of scratching their heads. But yes, the band was totally happy with the outcome.
Yeah, there he is. That's Lindsey Buckingham from Fleetwood Mac.